By now, you all probably know I love the Lord of the Rings movies. But when I'm not rewatching those for the millionth time, or watching pretentious, disturbing art house nonsense, I love a good monster movie. And while Gamera is clearly the king of the kaiju, I do like a good Godzilla movie too. So obviously, I'm stupid excited for the new Godzilla vs. Kong movie, and decided to build a little diorama of that awesome shot from the trailers and promo art of the two of them fighting on top of an aircraft carrier. And so first of all, it was off to two of my favorite stores. First off, we made a stop to the proud local company Toys R Us and picked up some of Mattel's toys based on the new movie. Then we hit up my favorite hobby store in all of Ottawa, the Hobby Center. This place isn't really a gaming store, but a scale model shop, and it's chock full of just about any kits or supplies you could think of. And so I picked out an aircraft carrier that looked about the right size, and I don't know military stuff. So I don't think this is the same kind as in the movie, or if it even makes sense in context, but the size and look was about right, so I went for it. And with that, I jumped right in and started on the model. I've never really assembled non-wargaming miniatures, other than one model of the Titanic I tried to build when I was like 10 and never finished. So it was fun to have a go at something different, and man, it was different. The detail on this thing is nuts, and it just has so many tiny pieces that I had to follow the instructions really carefully, which was rough, as they're awful. But as it came together, I started to get really proud of it. This is definitely a display miniature, as it's not even remotely durable enough for gaming. But it means that it can have so many more little bits on it, despite how easily they break. Finally, I wanted to add a bit of texture to the deck to show it was getting roughened up by these two big bastards on top. So I applied some agrellan earth in small patches and around where Godzilla's feet would end up. What's a ship without water? So I started on my base by cutting out a piece of wood, which I also cut 3 holes in so I could add some cheap tea lights to. I didn't want the ship sitting totally flat, so I grabbed some cheap clay I got at the dollar store to lift one end up, and this was rough to work with. It took me ages to get into a workable state, and even then, it was really stiff. So I made a vague outline of where I wanted the ship to be, and then pressed it into it to get the fit I wanted. Then to create the waves, I decided to use the tinfoil method I've seen on channels like Mini Bricks and North of the Border. Basically, you scrunch up some tubes of tinfoil and glue them down to make the shape of waves. When you have it looking the way you want, you cover the whole thing with more tinfoil. I did this by coating the whole base in PVA before laying one single sheet over it. I pressed it down to match the shape of the waves, and then cut out the section where the ship would sit before putting another layer of PVA over top to make it a bit more solid. And for a little added detail, I used some modeling paste to add some texture to the top of the waves and up against the hull of the ship. And with that, it was on to the monsters, and if you'll indulge me a little bit, I wanted to talk about the toys. Besides miniatures, my other big nerdy love is toys. I have tons of figures packed away, and some out on display. They're mostly Transformers with some Star Wars thrown in there for good measure, but for a while now I've wanted to add a good Godzilla and Kong to the mix. And while these aren't that, they're not bad. For Godzilla, he's not great. The sculpting is pretty good, but really soft. And the paint, while not bad, is just way off from how he should look. Also, both he and Kong have this expose the wounds gimmick going on, but the plastic is so soft and squishy that it's not fun at all to take it on and off. But where this guy really falls down is in the posability, as other than a hinge at the jaw and a ball joint at the tail, the rest is all swivels. A swivel at the right hip, a swivel at the left hip, really tight swivels at the feet that may not be meant to move, then a swivel at the left shoulder and a swivel at the right shoulder, and finally a swivel at the head, may not be meant to move, then a swivel at the left shoulder and a swivel at the right shoulder, and finally a left shoulder at the head, really tight shoulder, and finally a swivel at the right shoulder, then a swivel at the left shoulder and a swivel at the right shoulder, and finally a swivel at the head. 100% of the people watching this aren't going to get that reference, but I really wanted to do it anyways, so whatever. For Kong, while he looks okay, the paint is pretty basic, and the sculpting, while good, is very soft. And while he does have a bit more articulation than I expected with the universal elbow, shoulders, and hips, the range on them and the hinged knees really hampers the posability. And the fact the head and hands are just on swivels doesn't help. Regardless of how good these really are, they're actually still kind of fun, and look more than good enough for my project. I got both of them into the poses I wanted and used some really thin superglue to stick them in place. Then I needed to hide all the joints and decided to sculpt all over them using some milliput. I could have used green stuff, but I haven't used milliput in a while and wanted to try it again. Also, mine is really old, so the color is a bit gross. And this was actually really fun as I just kind of sat back and sculpted, trying my best to match the texture on the figures. Because this was more relaxed than painting, I actually spent a fair bit of the sculpting in front of the TV, where I again made my semi-yearly attempt to get into anime. This time it was Evangelion, and I'm about halfway through the show so far, and I'm definitely enjoying it a lot more than other animes I've watched, but it feels like I'm enjoying it in spite of it being anime. Anyways, back to the models. I'm pretty darn happy with how smooth I got the transition, and to soften it, I actually brushed on some isopropyl alcohol. Finally, I deepened the scars on Kong's chest with an X-Acto, and with that, we're on to painting. I primed the water white, the ship gray, and the monsters in black. And for the rest of the painting, I decided to only use my dollar store craft paints. For the water, I mixed up a really dark oceany blue with some dark blue, black, and forest green, and painted that into the deepest sections. While it was still wet, I mixed up a brighter version of the same color and applied it to the tips of the waves and kind of roughly wet blended them together. This was really wet and it took ages to dry, but once it was, I went in with a bit of white dry brush at the end to pick out the tips of the waves. For the boat, I mainly did the whole thing by stippling, starting with several layers of lighter and lighter gray for the main hull. Then I mixed up a nice dark red and freehanded a stripe at the bottom, though I didn't bother highlighting this as most of it would be below the water level. For the deck, I applied a dark asphalty gray by adding a tiny bit of white to black before once again stippling some highlights. With all that done, I painted the metal bits in gunmetal and then picked out the rest of the little details here and there before applying some selective washes. The fun bit though was doing the water slide decals, as I'd never really used them before. Basically, for those that don't know, they're like stickers, but more of a pain, but kind of better. First, you cut them out and place them in a bit of water to soak. After a few minutes, the image will detach from the paper and you can pick it off and apply it to your model. One thing that's great about these ones is they're actually already pre-cut around the designs, unlike a certain other companies. I applied a bit more water over the top of them to flatten them out, then to stick them down I wanted to use some matte medium, but I'm actually out of that. So instead I applied the only brush-on varnish I had, Citadel's Art Goat. This made them really shiny, but the final spray varnish should bring it all together. Then came the fun part, the monsters, and I started with Kong. I face coated the fur in a really dark reddy brown, and the skin in a kind of dark browny gray. Then with some progressively lighter and lighter dry brushes on the fur and layering on the skin, he was looking pretty good. Then for Godzilla, I went a bit wild. I did an initial coat of dark gray before applying lighter gray to his underbelly and dry brushing it over the rest of his body. With these base colors down, I wanted to bring in some more color and proceeded to water down blues, greens, browns, and even some pink. and applied them sporadically around the figure before giving the whole thing an all-over black wash and dry brushing back up to the faintest final highlight of pure white. Then once again, it was painting the detail and eyes, and it was time to stick the whole thing together. I had stuck dowels into Godzilla and Kong's feet for painting, and will also be using that for assembly. Basically, I drilled holes right through the ship with my power drill, and then used some construction adhesive to stick them all together. I used the same stuff to stick the ship onto the water, and covered up the gap with some more modeling paste that I textured to look like waves. And now it was onto the fun stuff to really bring it to life. The model kit came with a lot of these little planes and helicopters, so I painted up selection and started to stick them down onto the ship with super glue. I tried to place them in ways that made it look like they were sliding around due to the battle on top. And even when to make one look like it was about to crash into the ocean, and another one that already had. For these ones, I created splashes with more modeling paste, and for the two flying ones, I attached some cotton fluff to some paper clips and glued them to the back of the planes. Speaking of cotton fluff, I shaped up 3 bigger tufts and sprayed them with some black primer to make them look a bit like smoke, before sticking them down over the T-lights with some PVA glue. And with all that done, I just added a little border with some quarter round I had lying around, painted that black, and dry brushed on a gloss top coat to the water. This has to be both the best and stupidest thing I've ever built. I got to try out so many different techniques and work with tons of different materials. In the end, I love how it turned out and desperately want to make more dioramas. Now I just hope the movie's good. So again, thank you for all your support. I love seeing the responses you give me, so please go wild in the comments about why Gamera is the best kaiju. And if you could, share this around, as it's definitely a bit more out of my wheelhouse than I usually do. But for now, I'm Anders. Have a good one all.